Okay, guys, this weekend you're going to be taking a look at a really famous Supreme Court case from the 50s regarding civil rights. And we're doing this way because on Tuesday you'll be all prepared for the Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X lesson that we're going to do. And this is just some good background that's required as well. So we're looking at Brown versus Board of Education, why they decided to desegregate schools, and then also you're going to look at how Americans reacted to that. So what I would recommend is watching this video first, taking some notes, highlighting and reading the Brown decision, and then going to Edpuzzle and watching the 5-minute clip that shows you the reaction of Americans at Little Rock High School. And then I would come back and do those couple of little documents that I left you at the end about Little Rock. That's kind of the order that would make the most sense. All right. So just a little bit of background of what was going on in the 1950s. Americans were really fighting two different types of racism at this point. So de jure segregation is really what Brown was trying to fight against. It's segregation that happens legally because of things like Plessy. So it's by law, de jure. The other type of segregation that was going on in the background that we really still fight today is de facto segregation. And that's just more, there isn't a law telling you to do it. It's just the tradition, the customs that people are used to, the stereotypes. The other things that were important in terms of civil rights and racism in the 50s would be, this is when Rosa Parks in the mid 1950s refused to give up her seat, leading Martin Luther King, who at the time was not a famous person, but he rose up as a preacher in Montgomery. After that happened and she was arrested, he started the Montgomery bus boycott, which is what kind of catapulted him into as a national name. And then the other thing that was going on is that the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which had been founded in the 20s with the goal to really fight lynching, now it was focused more in the 1950s on fighting that type of segregation and forcing integration. So the background of the case itself is really the NAACP was looking for a test case to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson. So if you remember when we talked about evolution being taught in schools, the ACLU looked for a person who was willing to be arrested to kind of test those laws. So it's kind of similar. They were looking for someone who's going to say, I want my kid to go to that school, and they're not allowed to. So that ended up being Linda Brown. Her father, agreed. I think my daughter should be able to go to the school that's, a block away with the kids who live in the neighborhood instead of having to travel a great distance to a much less superior school because of her color. So they combined Linda Brown's case with 5 others to sue the Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas. The case is named after her just because her name comes first alphabetically. So the decision itself, what I'm going to have you guys look at here, is the court had to decide this question: does the segregation of children based on race deprive them of an equal education? And then they kind of added in this section. The question kind of says, even if the tangible factors are the same, meaning even if they physically had the same building, and let's say they had the exact same teachers and the exact same supplies, does segregation of children based on race deprive them of an equal education? That's the question. So what I want you guys to do, just kind of pause the video here for a minute, read that decision and just highlight all of the reasons that you see the court is giving for deciding to overturn Plessy. Like, why do they feel that segregation is wrong? And highlight all the examples that you can find. And then we'll talk about that when I see you guys again after that. Okay, so the other thing that we're going to look at quickly, and there's, again, a video clip that I want you to look at, is what is the reaction to the decision? So in the mid-1950s, they decide Brown versus Board of Education, it's overturning Plessy. Students are no longer going to be segregated based on race, et cetera, et cetera. What is the reaction to that? So many Southern states, Southern governors, Southern politicians just basically said, we're going to ignore it. So the Southern politicians told people to ignore it. Many Southern schools then ignored it. So down South, things really didn't change. Most, if not all, schools remained segregated. In some cases where it started to actually change, what you saw was a pretty big dramatic shift in white children going to private schools in order to avoid it. And what we're going to look at today is one very famous specific example of where a school chose to ignore it, and finally the president felt like they had to step in. So that happened at Little Rock High School in Arkansas. Little Rock High School today continues to be one of the top 20 best high schools in America. It's always ranked very high. It's a beautiful big school, great education there. But essentially, because it was down south, the governor of Arkansas had been basically telling the schools and the politicians in Arkansas, just ignore it. So the Supreme Court came down 2 years after Brown with a second decision, Brown 2, which basically said you need to do this with all deliberate speed. So Little Rock, Arkansas was scheduled in 1957 to open up with African-American students going there. Only 9 were enrolled at the time, so the Little Rock 9 were going to go to school on that first day. Basically, the governor called in the National Guard of Arkansas to surround the high school so that those 9 students could not get in. So what you're going to see in the video footage that you'll watch, the other little short clip on Edpuzzle, is that first day of school, these kids trying to walk to school. If you look at this picture on the bottom left, mobs are surrounding the kids, cutting them off from each other, making it basically impossible. So they gave up. They could not go to school on that first day. So this is where Eisenhower, who at this point in 1957 was president, he had really been quiet on civil rights and pretty much just stayed out of it. He felt like it was not his place to kind of force these things to happen. He saw the footage of this and thought it is wrong for a governor to be using the National Guard to stop students from going to school. So he sent in the military, the 101st Airborne. A week later, they basically drove those kids into school with jeeps and police vehicles and military vehicles rather. So that's what you're going to see in that footage. It's amazing. It's crazy to watch that actually happened. So when this video is done, stop this, go back over and watch that 5-minute clip of Little Rock, and then come back to the document and take a few minutes to look at what you're going to see are 3 different perspectives on one incident. So even though those 9 students were allowed to go into school, they definitely did not have an easy time of it. They were harassed, bullied, beaten up on a daily basis. And some of them did not make it through to graduation. So you're going to be reading about one incident where one girl one of those Little Rock 9 got expelled. And you're kind of looking at, from different perspectives, I would say. Okay. So we'll talk more about this when I see you guys on Tuesday. And then we're going to be looking at, what happened with Martin Luther King and what happened with Malcolm X, and who would you have followed if you were a young civil rights teenager at that time. Okay.